Hey, I'm Luke. This is Walker Brothers Kombucha, and I'm gonna give you kind of a rundown of what we're doing here, and then we'll talk about our backstory too.
Awesome. We are in Nashville, Tennessee, and Walker Brothers started because Luke and his brother were brewing kombucha and other things at their house, and now they have a big facility that we're about to see. So can you talk to us a little bit about that process of how you started and why you started?
Yeah. So our motto is actually a family culture, and it's clever and it's actually true that we inherited our culture originally from my aunt, and that was in a small mason jar. And when I first moved to Nashville from Boston about 5 years ago, started homebrewing kombucha then, and that was just like 1 gallon at a time, sometimes 5 gallons. But the reason for getting into it initially was that I had pretty bad acid reflux, and I had taken some prescription steroids and done voice therapy. At the time I wanted to be a singer-songwriter, so it was really getting in the way. And then I came across a bunch of forums online talking about apple cider vinegar and the healing properties of raw apple cider vinegar in particular with the mother. So I tried it out and I noticed pretty incredible results. And I'd already been drinking kombucha at the time because my aunt was brewing it and I enjoyed it, so I would buy it elsewhere too. But kind of came to recognize the overlap with apple cider vinegar and kombucha, for me at least, is a much more enjoyable drinking experience. So that's why I started home brewing, and my brother Sam and I were living together at the time, and we're both big craft beer people as well. But the funny part of the story there is craft beer is one of the main culprits for acid reflux for me, what causes it. So one day had this idea to try to brew kombucha with higher alcohol content that would be kind of like a sour beer, and started working on that project, and Sam was helping out too, and we stayed at that for a couple of years until we were onto something that tastes pretty good, and from there this kind of grew out of that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think what some people know and some people probably don't is it's interesting that you make that connection between apple cider vinegar and kombucha, because the bacterial profile of kombucha is similar to that of vinegar, because there's a lot of bacteria that produce acetic acid, and vinegar is acetic acid. So there's a lot of overlap between the microbial profile of kombucha and vinegar, even though kombucha is a more diverse culture, right?
Yeah, so kombucha has a lot of different yeast and bacteria strains playing together, really. It's kind of like this dance where you're trying to keep everything in balance, and that's when people talk about the scoby. It's this symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. And so a healthy kombucha culture is one that is not going too much in either the bacteria direction or too much in the yeast direction. There's a lot of variables at play there, like temperature and keeping track of your pH when you're brewing, things like that allow you to maintain that a bit more. But in terms of the actual benefits that I was noticing personally, it was mainly acetic acid bacteria. So people talk about probiotics a lot with kombucha, but one of the main healing properties of kombucha is just the beneficial acids in it really will help alkalize your body and just get it to kind of a more comfortable state, especially if you're eating a a diet that is somewhat acid producing or drinking alcohol.
So, kombucha is such a diverse culture. It's in some ways probably a lot harder to ferment than beer, because in beer people are kind of pasteurizing their beer and adding one particular yeast strain. It's a domesticated yeast strain, so they know how it's going to behave. And I think there's a lot more nuance to working with a kombucha culture that's so diverse and has, like you said, yeast and bacteria, and there's a dance between those. So did you feel like you had resources to go off of when you were starting that, or it's been a lot of trial and error, or how did you do that?
It's been a lot of trial and error, and I think there are resources online, but I think the real issue you run into is with scale. You quickly scale out of resources. So actually, this is a perfect time to talk about, right behind us, these are the tanks that we started brewing in our garage once we had decided, we're gonna launch a business. So we started trying to scale our 5-gallon batches into these 60-gallon stainless steel open fermenters, and from there we've scaled up a lot more. But I think it is interesting in comparison to beer. It's much less controlled. So the way that I like to think about it is it's a listening game. And in that sense, it's almost more similar to gardening than it is to brewing beer. That said, obviously a lot of the microbes, there's overlap. So I definitely read a lot of books on beer brewing and stuff like that, just to give myself more know-how. But yeah, managing kombucha fermentation is kind of like checking in on a plant every day and paying attention to the nutrient needs and what that plant is communicating with you, because it is just like a plant. It's a living culture, and it is speaking if you listen. So
yeah, you're like this tender of a living ecosystem.
That's exactly
in constant flux.
And the really cool part is that if, once you get past that initial threshold where you're kind of entering into what feels like no man's land, like I don't have any clear resources now, you start to pay a lot closer attention to what the culture is telling you. And so to tie that to your own palate is a pretty amazing experience, and it really I think it just helps you appreciate food, beverage in general, because you're paying attention to all these little nuances, all these minute flavor details, and then you're guiding this whole culture of living yeast and bacteria based on what your tongue's telling you. So that's pretty special.
Awesome. Okay, we are going to walk through a brew day and talk about what that looks like, which is not unlike the home process, just on a much bigger scale. So let's go do that.
Yeah, so we are kind of purists in our brewing methods, in terms of when we got into this, we just knew that we didn't want to be cutting corners or coming up with systems that weren't true to a traditional kombucha brewing practice. So the goal for us in scaling, like I said, there wasn't a clear model to follow, but we just wanted to come up with a system that was as similar to a homebrew process as possible, so that when you see your classic 1-gallon glass jar with a cloth on it, and you do that, you try that, we want to be offering the same thing, but basically just we'll make it for you and put our spin on it.
Right, something as high quality and tasty as you can make at home, but just done on a more large and standardized scale.
Yeah, and I think one really key differentiator there is like kombucha is a open fermented beverage, and so there are ways in which you can ferment kombucha in closed fermenters, but we just didn't want to pull away from the tradition and kind of what we consider just a core piece of what kombucha is meant to be. Open fermentation also, it does make it so it is, again, more of a gardening practice because you are less in control. Wild yeast can enter your ferment at any time, so your culture is constantly evolving. But that's really part of the beauty of what kombucha is, part of the art of brewing it. So, but yeah, so this is, we'll kind of walk you through our average brew day, what it looks like in comparison to your 1 gallon home brew, how we've modeled out our system. So right here we have a 300 gallon, it's actually a beer fermenter, so it's stainless steel. We had a friend of ours weld a heating element into the side of it, and that way we can heat up water in here to the temperature where we can steep our tea blend. And we use really high quality, fair trade, organic Chinese teas that we get from a purveyor called Rishi Tea. And yeah, we really enjoy their tea.
Do you use black tea or green tea, or?
We actually use a blend of black, green, and a little bit of jasmine. We put a little bit of jasmine in everything we brew just because it's our favorite. I think there's nothing like fermented jasmine tea. Like, the flavor that you get oftentimes is kind of like white grape. It just really sings. So we wanted it to be in everything we do. But so yeah, we'll heat this up usually to around 185 degrees, 190 degrees, and then steep really large bags of tea in there. And once our tea steep is done, we will use a good sanitary stainless brew pump with some hoses and basically pump that hot tea concentrate into whichever tank we're going to ferment in. So we can walk over to one of our non-alcoholic fermenters. We've designated them. So these two here are alcoholic. We're not brewing today, so you'll see that they're kind of wide open. And then over here we have our non-alcoholic fermenters. Both of these are full right now, so you can see the cloths up top. That's just like your cloth covering at home. But so going back to the process, we have our hot tea concentrate. So we're steeping way more tea than you would in your average cup of tea. So it really would not taste pleasant at that time. It's really astringent. But that's because we're mainly just wanting to suck the nutrients from that tea, because that's going to provide essential nutrients for the yeast and bacteria to feed on during the ferment. So we've got this tea concentrate that's pretty hot, goes into this tank through this port right here, which has a little whirlpool arm. It's what we call it, but it's a stainless arm that kind of points towards the side of the tank, and then we can pump it really quickly so it creates this whirlpool or like cyclone effect. And from there we can add our organic Brazilian cane sugar, and that allows us basically to just stir in sugar automatically. We don't have to have some sort of big oar or anything like that. So that's pretty convenient. We'll let that stir in for a while just so it's evenly blended. And then once we have a very, very sweet and very strong tea concentrate, so too astringent to drink, too sweet to drink, then we will actually cool that down with filtered water. And that's doing two things at once. It's adjusting the temperature closer to where we want to be fermenting, and also diluting the fermentables to basically the degree where we want to start a fermentation. So it's not way too sweet. So we'll add filtered water till we hit our desired temperature, and we've got it all, scaled up, batched by recipe, so we know how much water we want to be adding. We use a tool called a flow meter, which basically you can pump water through it, keeps track of the gallons. Very handy. But once we hit our target temperature, then the last step would be to pump in our house culture, or at home most people call it starter liquid. And we do that. Usually we want to make sure that we're not adding in house culture if the liquid is still too hot. So there are times where we need to let it cool down a bit. This tank, you can see, has this dimpled jacket on it. That allows us to have some temperature control. So if we come in a little hotter than we want, we can cool it down to our desired fermentation temperature. It's pretty convenient. But then we're gonna dose in. If you're brewing at home, you always want to add at least 10% starter liquid, and that's just for safety reasons. But the easiest way to make sure you're staying safe is by a pH meter. So everything we brew, we're brewing it, even at the start of fermentation, it's clocking in below 4.5 pH. And by the end of fermentation, it's finishing well down below that, closer to 3. And basically that just guarantees you protection from certain pathogenic bacteria, things that you don't want growing in there. So, but yeah, so after the sweet tea is diluted, we add in our starter liquid, and then we'll add in our scobies as the last step. And believe it or not, these tanks are 8 feet wide, but our scobies will, we break them apart just so they're manageable by hand. But by the end of fermentation, we have this scoby that's filling the full diameter of this tank.
So question about the scoby, like, the liquid starter is a sgoby as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a really important community. I think sometimes we get confused, like, because people are they just want to talk about the sgoby being the physical, but maybe having the starter is almost most important.
Yes.
Do you think that the actual physical scoby is there kind of as a surface level protection, or is it there to add some sort of microbial culture, or what are your thoughts on the physical scoby?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's actually a lot of debate within the kombucha world, even though the kombucha world is this kind of funny, very niche world, about whether or not you even need a scoby. And technically you don't. You do need starter liquid, but a scoby, or a pellicle is what it's called in craft beer brewing, that's actually a byproduct of the fermentation. So regardless of whether or not you choose to add a scoby at the beginning of your fermentation, you will end with a scoby if you're introducing starter liquid. But there are reasons for choosing to brew with a scoby, and we choose to do it, I would say, for two main reasons. One is there's just a bit of tradition to it that I really enjoy and want to be participating in. But I also think from again, if you're taking on the like gardener metaphor, for us, we've noticed that a scoby is one more point of control or point of guidance for the fermentation. If you're adding in just starter liquid, I think your ferments actually have a lot more chance of varying batch to batch in terms of consistency. And the main reason for that is if your starter liquid, say, is a bit more bacteria dominant than yeast dominant, that means that you're basically a lot of the yeast that could be coming into that new brew could just be coming in right through the top because you're fermenting open. So there's more potential for what's called cultural drift. And that just means if you're game to have each ferment taste pretty different, you know, that's totally fine. But as producers at this scale, we want to be, you know, when there's customers supporting us and having favorite flavors and things like that, we really want to be delivering something consistent. And so what's nice about brewing with the scoby is then you're coming at it from two ends. You're introducing your bacteria culture and your yeast culture with that starter liquid, but you basically have a level of insurance. That's kind of how I view brewing with a scoby. Okay, we know this last batch came out really good. We have a scoby from that last batch, which is inoculated with all this fresh yeast that's ready to eat again. So we can kind of trust that this next batch will come out similar if we add that scoby or pellicle on top.
So how many people does it take to get that scoby off there, and then do you cut it in half? It seems like it would be hard to keep it hygienic. Yeah. And then transfer it in a hygienic way. Yeah,
it's taken some creativity for sure. So these tanks here actually have what are called manways. So this is just this front door on the tank essentially. And it's right where the tank starts to slope into a gradual dish. And so after we've transferred a finished ferment out of here, we're left with a scoby sitting right around this level. And we can open up this doorway. And what we'll do, it's really cool. We've found that as we grow the business, all these tanks that you think you're growing out of, all of a sudden just have a different use. So those fermenters over there that we started the business with as our main, you know, brewing vessels, now those are our main scoby vessels. So we will bring those tanks over right beneath this doorway, and we actually we use a commercial fishing hook. So a stainless steel fishing hook. Wow. And then gloves, and we sanitize the gloves beforehand, but we will manually pull those scobies out and house them in these other stainless steel tanks in between batches. So it is all very sanitary, but it's kind of a funny, a bit laborsome, but it actually, I mean, scobies, if you've ever handled a scoby, they're pretty slick. So once you give a good pull, it'll start sliding out. But usually we just kind of manually pull them apart into pieces so it's more manageable.
Gotcha.
To add back in later.
Okay.
So we don't do any sort of cutting.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what's left to cover is the starter liquid.
Yeah.
Because we know we've got the tea, the sweet tea that's been diluted with water here, and then we add at least 10% starter liquid.
Yep.
And so y'all are, maybe unlike a lot of home brewers, you're fermentation and management of the starter liquid happens separately from your main.
Yeah, that's definitely worth talking about. So basically in kombucha brewing, there's two main camps of kind of brewing procedures that people subscribe to. One is called batch brewing. That means at the end of each brew, you are saving 10% for starter potentially, but you're actually going to brew in another vessel. You're going to start the brew process over kind of from scratch, but you have your starter liquid. The other method, which is in some ways more convenient, but in the long run, I would say probably less convenient because it's higher risk or just harder to manage consistently, would be what's called continuous brewing. And so similar, you have what's left that would be your starter liquid, but instead of cleaning out a new vessel and brewing in there, you're actually just topping it off. So you're constantly just feeding this mother. And what's great about that is you can build up this really strong bacteria culture, but the downside is oftentimes those continuous cultures are going to end up somewhat imbalanced, leaning towards the bacteria side. And so we just chose to do it all batch ferments here for a couple of reasons. Mainly from a sanitary perspective, we want to clean all our tanks in between every brew. So we do what's called CIP, or clean in place. That's what it's called in the beer world, but you're using a sanitary brew pump and basically cleaning caustic and cleaning acid to really scrub that tank clean. So you're starting fresh every time. And that's just a good preventative measure. But then on top of that, you know, as we're growing this business, it's way easier to keep track of how much we're producing, where all that liquid is going. Basically, just for our team to be super on top of our expenses and, you know, the tax paperwork that we need to be filing with batch brewing process is continuous. It's, you know, if you're leaving some in the tank because you have a scoby in there too, you don't know exactly how much liquid there is because the scoby has some volume, and so we're happy to do it the batch way. But we have found that for maintaining your like house culture or your starter liquid, your mother, continuous is a really efficient way to do that. So we actually are kind of employing both methods here. Anything that we're brewing that's going to go out into the market and be sold on a shelf is batch brewed. But anytime we're adding that 10% or more starter liquid, it's coming from a continuous brew. And that's, again, another layer of that is just the preventative measure, the safety measure. The continuous brews will have such good acidity to them, such strong bacteria culture, that it's, when you're inoculating a fresh brew with that, you're really in a safe standing to get off to a good start. So.
Okay, cool. Well, and you serve, and maybe we can talk a little bit about the flavors that you have, and why you decided maybe can over glass, and then we'll close it up.
For sure. So we do both non-alcoholic, so traditional kombucha, and alcoholic kombucha. Right here, this is a can of one of our non-alc flavors, cucumber melon. All these cans stacked here are just empty cans, so that's why kombucha does require cold storage. If it's actual living kombucha. But yeah, so for the non-alcoholic flavors, we do all of those in cream colored cans. That's the way that we designate between our two product lines. Our alcoholic products are in basically saturated colored cans. So this is a perfect example. They're both the same green and white, but this is alcoholic, 5% alcohol. Mm-hmm. This one is non-alcoholic. So we've got cucumber melon, ginger, blueberry jasmine, and citrus are non-alcoholic core flavors. Blueberry jasmine is our top selling flavor. That one we're just cold steeping whole blueberries and an additional small dose of jasmine tea. Like I said, we're kind of obsessed with jasmine tea. Really high quality jasmine tea. It tastes so good. And then for the alcoholic flavors, we have that green one there. It's called Citra hops. So we're just using a hop variety. That's our most beer-like flavor. The hop variety is called Citra, and we use whole cone hops. So basically you can get hops in pellet form or whole cone. And then we also have a ginger flavor for the alcoholic. We call it high gravity kombucha. We're not huge fans of the terminology hard, just because it kind of associates you with products that don't have the same fermented dedication to craft, I would say. And then the last core alcoholic flavor is watermelon lime. Yes. And we are about to add a new core, which I'll give a hint, is going to be also a blueberry inspired flavor. So we're excited about that. And the reason we chose cans is, so we're based in Nashville. My brother Sam and I grew up in Boston, and everywhere we've lived, we've always had the privilege of having glass recycling be easily accessible. Unfortunately, here in Nashville, while you can take some extra measures to recycle your glass, there's not a widespread glass recycling service that's picking up at your house with large trucks. So we just didn't really want to contribute to throwing glass in the trash. So it was kind of a no-brainer for us from a sustainability perspective of we want recyclable packaging. But it was kind of a toss-up because at the time that we launched the business, most of the kombucha on shelves, pretty much all of it was in glass. So we were like, I don't know, people might not be about this, but no regrets at all. Canning is really convenient, and we're big outdoors people, so super active, love to hike, rock climb, swim, whatever it may be. And so cans travel well. You can stomp them down and pack them up to take them with you, rather than littering, of course, or accidentally breaking glass. So yeah, cans has been a good move.
Yeah, they're lighter, easier. We can recycle them here, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to put in the description box below, I'll put a link to y'all's Instagram and to your website so people can check you out, because you're growing a lot. You don't just sell here in Tennessee.
Yeah.
You sell in other states as well. So, and a lot of people seeing this video live in other countries, but it's inspiring to hear your story, because some people brewing right now might just be doing the 1 gallon thing, and maybe in a couple years they'll end up doing like a bigger commercial setup like you've got here.
Yeah, and I think one piece of advice I would have, if you are interested in exploring the possibility of a commercial setup, is, well, I guess 2 pieces of advice. reach out to as many people as you can who are already in the industry, and let the industry be broader than kombucha, because kombucha is, even though it's an ancient tradition, it's a new space when it comes to this sort of production. So we reached out to loads of friends in our like craft beer network who were super informative and just really generous to share information with us. But yeah, I would say there's enough crossover to be asking people who are making wine or beer, basically any sort of food processing or beverage processing at scale. Do your due diligence, ask questions, don't be shy. And then the other piece of advice I would give is just be creative. You know, when you hit a roadblock in terms of not knowing how to scale up your process, have fun with it. Just like you're being creative and, you know, coming up with flavors and whatnot, have that same mentality when it comes to designing a brew system, because at the end of the day, that will keep you a lot more engaged with what you're doing too.
Well, thank you so much, and your kombucha is amazing. So keep up the good work, and I hope that the project continues to grow.
Yeah, I hope so too. Thanks for visiting.
Okay.
Sharing.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right.